pushed to the brink. So we thought it best to re-record the session and have a clear recording to share. I'm Carolyn Jacobs, training manager at WGBH, which is Boston's PBS station. And Boston is also the co-producer, along with PBS, of PBS LearningMedia. We hear every day from educators who are rising to the challenge of juggling distance learning with their students while juggling their own children at home. And we're at Public Media, we're doing our best to support educators and parents. And one of the ways we can do that is to offer virtual sessions like this on timely topics and featuring top-notch presenters such as this one on project-based learning. The session is sponsored by WGBH, WGBY in Springfield, Mass., and PBS LearningMedia, which is a free library of digital resources for K-12 across the curriculum. We want to give a special thank you for the support and collaboration provided by the Harold Grinspoon Foundation, which sponsors an annual teacher award program in Massachusetts. Many of the 2020 awardees, I'm sure, are listening to this recording. And Sue Klein, director of the foundation, has a few words of welcome. Go ahead, Sue.
Welcome to hundreds of Massachusetts educators who will view and take part on this webinar on student engagement and project-based learning. And of course, special congratulations to the participants who've won the 2020 Pioneer Valley Excellence in Teaching Awards. I'm Sue Klein, director of this awards program for the Harold Grinspoon Charitable Foundation in partnership with the Irene E. and George A. Davis Foundation, honoring over 100 teachers annually. We're thrilled to join WGBY Springfield and WGBH Boston under the leadership of Carolyn Jacobs for this webinar facilitated by nationally recognized expert Suzie Boss. And we're so proud that it features the Project of 2019 Excellence in Teaching Award winner, Jeromie Whalen of Northampton High School, right here in Western Massachusetts. You will also learn about the amazing PBS LearningMedia educational resources accessible to all of you as teachers. I hope you'll enjoy, get answers, and be enriched by everything you see and hear during the next hour. Thank you.
And thank you, Sue. All right, I want to introduce our presenters. So Suzie Boss is a longtime champion of project-based learning, a writer of many, many books on the topic, an educational consultant, and on the faculty of PBL Works, formerly known as the Buck Institute. She works with schools around the world interested in shifting to a more student-centered, innovative approach to teaching and learning. And joining her is Jeromie Whalen, communications and media production teacher. And I see something is wrong with the listing of Jeromie on this slide. He is not a PhD student at UMass Amherst, I don't believe.
No, that's actually indeed.
Jeromie, excuse me?
That's actually indeed right.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I didn't realize that was changed. Okay, great. Well, congratulations, Jeromie. I didn't know you were a doctoral student. And also he is at Northampton Schools. All right, so we are today going to dig right in with Suzie Boss, who will do a little bit of introduction about PBL, and then we're going to hear from Jeromie, and the two of them will have a very lively conversation back and forth to really probe a little deeper into how to get started and what PBL is all about. And then I will come back on at the end with some announcements about what public media is doing for distance learning in this brave new world that we're all experiencing, and also some upcoming events. So I'm going to turn it right over to Suzie.
Okay, Carolyn, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and the invitation to join you all today. And thanks, Sue Klein, for your work to really celebrate the work of excellent teachers like Jeremy, who we'll be hearing from shortly. So my home is Portland, Oregon. And if it's a typical year, my travel calendar is very busy. Earlier this year, before life changed for all of us, I was in India, as you see here, and I've had opportunities to work with educators really around the world who were interested in doing the sort of work you're doing in bringing project-based learning to your students. As Carolyn mentioned, I'm on the national faculty of PBL Works, which is an organization, nonprofit group focused on bringing project-based learning to students and teachers around the world. And I've been a longtime contributor to Edutopia. Carolyn mentioned that I've written some books. We'll be talking a bit about project-based teaching today, which is the one on the left here. My other most recent book looks at the role of technology to support project-based learning. So when we had our live audience here the other day, I asked them to tell us a little bit about their experience with project-based learning. And the results were just all across the spectrum, from armchair traveler, folks who were just sort of reading up, wondering if this is a good fit for you and your students, to tenderfeet doing their very first projects, explorers who have done some projects and now have new and deeper sorts of questions, and even scouts like Jeremy who can guide and teach others. And I think the message there is that any community of educators is going to have a wide range of experience when it comes to project-based learning, and it's a wonderful opportunity to learn together. So find out who are the scouts in your school community, who can you learn with, who might you partner up with on your next project, and you're going to have some like-minded educators and some great fun in working together. Our driving question for today is here: how can we increase student engagement by focusing on key features of high-quality PBL? And we really want to emphasize the high quality because that's what's going to really provide the best learning outcomes for our students. As you think about the qualities that good projects share, probably some particular things come to mind. We asked this question in the survey last week of teachers, and there were a lot of common themes in their responses. Many of them focused on it being real-world learning. Some talked about open-ended questions, the role of collaboration and creativity, student inquiry throughout the project. And those are all great examples of the qualities of good projects. I mentioned PBL Works earlier, and this organization really took a hard look at the question of how do we design for high-quality learning experiences with PBL. The result is the book that you see on the right, Setting the Standard for Project-Based Learning, as well as the framework you see in the middle, the gold standard for project-based learning. And in this gold standard, we really are being aspirational, helping teachers think about if you're going to design for the best possible learning experiences, isn't it helpful to know in advance what you should be looking for, what you should be aiming for to get to those best results? If you think of this as a camera lens opening up, right at the center focus are the learning goals, both the academic knowledge that students are acquiring and the success skills, or what some of you might think of as 21st century skills like collaboration or critical thinking. And then everything around the outside is of equal importance, from that challenging problem or question to inquiry throughout, authenticity for real-world learning, students making decisions, having voice and choice, along with reflection about their own learning, critique and revision to make their work better so that eventually when they share their work with a public product who will care about what they've accomplished, it's of really high quality. All of these things are really important, and it's a lot to think about, perhaps if you're brand new to project-based learning, but one of the things that helps is to see this in action. So in just a moment, we're going to introduce you, take you right into the middle of a project, a classroom led by teacher Cheryl Bautista from San Jose, California. She's one of the teachers I interviewed for the book Project-Based Teaching, and she's also one of the teachers whose project is shared at the PBL Works website, and that's one of the resources you can download at the end of this presentation. Carolyn's going to start the video in just a second. What I want you to know before she hits go is that this is a project where students are designing tiny houses. It's a very small footprint houses for real clients, and they've just done an entry event in Minecraft to get them thinking about what do we know about houses, how do we design homes, what are the qualities of homes, and they're just launching into their first conversation about what they need to know to find out. So over to you, Carolyn.
Just be free and just to build without anybody giving them parameters. Back to our project and this driving question. What do we need to know to answer this question?
Like, say they have family that's going to come live with them. They have to think about that. Like, have a guest room.
The Minecraft building sparked, like, how many rooms do we build? And so they came up with their need to knows. Any other need to knows you'd like to add?
You have to imagine how much it costs.
Well, we have to know, like, how many kids there are or how big the family is. And what are those questions that you think you should ask the client? And they're like, yeah. And so we come back to the driving question. We came back to the need to knows. And we came back to their entry event just so that they can get some questions that are appropriate for their project to their clients.
What is the minimum square footage you want?
400 feet.
Do you want a second story?
Yes, the second story would be good.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that'd be cool.
I think it's important for them to know that there's a real client because it gives the...
Okay, so Carolyn's going to bring us back to our slides, and what you see Cheryl talking about there is the authenticity of this project. These students are designing for actual clients. The folks that you see them interviewing are the ones they'll be presenting their final work to at the end of the project. And in this short little clip, you saw Cheryl, the teacher, setting the stage for student inquiry. She's really creating experiences right off the bat so that students are asking questions. And as the learning unfolds, as the project goes forward, their learning is being driven by those questions, their desire to answer their own questions and produce something of quality for their clients is what's going to really take the learning forward. And finally, if you're an early years student, an elementary teacher, you can take a look at the whole video and see Cheryl using some familiar strategies, things like literacy stations and math rotations. She hasn't given up on traditional teaching practices. She's just embedded them very strategically into the life of the project. So that's one example you might want to take a look at a little bit later. In Cheryl's example, we saw inquiry getting off to a good start. We saw authenticity. We saw student voice and choice in students asking their own questions. These three elements in particular really set the stage for a high level of student engagement. All of these elements are important for getting to high quality products and deep learning, but I think these three in particular really set the stage for a high degree of engagement, and that engagement is the energy that's going to fuel the whole project. So let's take another look at what authenticity might look like in a high school setting. So this is a high school math class, and teacher Talena Norfar is in the middle of a project with her students where she's brought in an expert. Her students, just for a little background, once again, they have real clients, but in this case, they're using their understanding of mathematics to develop individualized financial plans for different clients. So they need to understand what are the needs of these clients, what's the situation with their budgets, how do we think about the different mathematics that we're learning, in this case in pre-AP calculus, in order to really create a solid financial plan that will help our clients meet their goals. And at this moment in the project, she's brought in an expert to give the students a little more expert insight. So if we can go ahead and take a look at this clip, Carolyn.
And then vetting the questions.
So the sooner you can save, the better off you are. So that goes into college planning. There are many vehicles available for college planning. You can invest in 529 plans.
I had a financial planner named Laura Payne come in to talk with the finance project students about the details of financial planning so that they can understand how to become a financial planner for the families that they were helping.
So this couple wanted to retire at 65. Well, based on where they are, they can retire at 62. So they can retire 2 years earlier, and they're still at 88%.
One thing I love about bringing a practitioner in is it gives life to what the subject means in a way that you just can't talk about.
So once again, in this example, we see authenticity in terms of real clients that students are designing for, and also a real profession. Math is being used in the way that it's used in the world outside the classroom. So authenticity shows up in different ways, and that adds to the engagement of the project. I'll share just a couple more examples to help you think about the wide range of project topics and ways that teachers structure them. A really nice example of inquiry unfolding across a project is demonstrated in a classroom from Tennessee, where students were actually the winners of last year's first ever NPR podcast challenge. They won the high school division. This was an interdisciplinary project. A teacher from English and a teacher from history, social studies teamed up to have their students think about what's a great story we could tell about the history of our own community. A small town, a little town in Tennessee, so students really had to dig in as local historians to find out what's a story worth telling, what questions do we have that we want to uncover, who should we talk to. All of that sort of questioning and research happened long before they got their hands on any sound editing equipment in order to produce the podcast. So the strong focus on learning goals led the way through the project. Technology helped them create a final product that was outstanding, but it was the inquiry throughout that really led them to having a great story to tell. So think about how are you getting students' questions fired up as the project unfolds. We've talked a lot about authenticity already, but another great example I think connects to where we are right now. This is a photo of some students in Elk Grove, California. Teacher Jim Bentley has his students producing video documentaries for authentic clients, and often they're producing content that their city council needs. They're often waste management services or city recycling efforts. What they're often trying to do is get adults, getting community members to change their behavior, to be better stewards of the earth, better at things like recycling plastic waste. They connect to real experts who are doing the same sort of work, and they produce a product that's useful for their own community. If you think about products that your students might be producing right now in response to the pandemic, you could imagine your students creating content around how to stay safe, how to wash your hands, how to go shopping carefully, all those sorts of things that are on everyone's minds right now, and students can be real content creators. And finally, the idea of student voice and choice. This one requires some teacher flexibility. And I think all of us in education right now are really being stretched when it comes to how flexible can we be as we think about learning in some new ways. So think about what your students might have access to at home, which might be different than at school in terms of making their thinking visible, perhaps producing products, and it might be a little different than it's been when you're all under more normal circumstances of learning together. But as you think about ways to increase the student engagement in your next project, think about how you can a little bit perhaps turn up that authenticity valve, turn up the real world emphasis of the project, give students more choices, more ways to make their learning known, and I think you'll likely see some more engagement along the way. A couple more hints about where good project ideas come from, and then we're going to take a look at Jeromie's classroom and hear what's going on there. A few examples for you, looking at your own standards and thinking about who uses these standards in the world outside of school. We saw that in the finance project where math was being used for financial planning. This example is from a high school teacher who was thinking about how can I get my students to be better at that standard of developing an argument and backing it up with evidence. So she created a mock trial for her students to take part in, but it was really driven by the need for students to get better at argumentation. The mock trial was a very engaging way for students to make their thinking known and to really challenge themselves as thinkers, but it all started with her standards. Sometimes it's students' own questions and concerns that lead you to a great project idea. These are very young learners. They're transitional kindergarten students, and they're concerned about taking care of their environment. And for them, their environment means their own playground area. They were not happy with the way that it was being taken care of or really not being taken care of by their fellow students. That launched them on a project thinking about what sorts of jobs are involved in taking care of an environment and what kind of tools might we invent or create to help us take better care of our environment. all along the way, wonderful use of student questioning and student questions, listening, thinking, speaking, writing, all the things that you want to focus on in literacy in those early years. And finally, connecting to current events and real issues. And I think all of the issues today are ripe with project possibilities. Every day, if you're paying attention to the news, you're probably seeing discussions of math and science in ways that we're all just dependent on. We all need to know what's going on with this pandemic, and your students are feeling the same thing. So connecting to current issues, one of the videos at PBL Works that does a wonderful job of this is about water quality in Flint, Michigan, and some students coming up with potential solutions for keeping lead out of the drinking water based on their response to a real current event that they cared about. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and hear from Jeromie talking about what his classroom looks like, and in particular, what's the teacher's role in project-based learning? We know from lots and lots of interviews with teachers that PBL is very much student-centered learning, student-driven learning, but the teacher's role is so critical to shaping and guiding the whole experience. So Jeromie, I'm going to hand over to you, and
Awesome.
Off you go.
Thank you, Suzie, and thank you, Carolyn and Sue, for setting this up. And yeah, awesome stuff that we just saw. One of the things that I just want to point out is how diverse all of that was. It's just such a wonderful thing to see students engaging in such different ways, and we're going to look at a couple of ways that, or a way that my journalism students engage with PBL. And so as we look at this, we're kind of framing this around the coronavirus shutdown and everything, and all over social media we've recently seen empty shelves be the target of frustrations. But I wanted to share this with you. It was on that Monday, right before everything, the school entirely shut down, and the students were kind of ushered out on that Friday, and they had a window of time to come up and pick up packets and everything for the closing of the school. And so I threw it out to the students. I said, hey, we have all this gear. It's just sitting on the shelves collecting dust. If anybody wants me to package some up, sanitize it, I will send it home with you, and you can keep your journalistic studies going. And next thing I knew, I was rushing around that entire day, and the shelves were empty in my classroom. And I think that it's just a really great testament to what we're dealing with project-based learning, and students are engaged, and there's just an intrinsic value to what they're doing, and they don't want to stop. And so that's what you want to try to encourage and target and foster for project-based learning. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just a quick question there. I mean, you're really speaking well to the culture of the classroom that you've created, so that that excitement is there, but also you've got a great deal of trust in your students that they're going to use that equipment well. Just any advice for teachers who are starting out on how do you get that wonderful kind of learning culture in place?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we're going to look at in just a second is building the culture and building the community. And a lot of that comes with the conveyance of positivity and fostering of that morale from the teacher, but also pinpointing areas in which the students may also foster that as well. So we'll take a look at that in a second as well. But yeah, a lot of trust goes into this, and once the students start engaging with whatever you're doing, in this case with the gear, they become attached to that, and they start caring it for and maintaining that the camera equipment or whatever you're using, just as if it was their own. So it's really important to, yes, foster that community and foster that culture where everybody's appreciative of what is available to them for materials.
Great.
And so just before we start all of this, we're going to look at something that I've been developing over the last several years, and it's constantly being evolved. But project-based learning is for all grades in all age ranges. And it also is all levels of ability and accommodations. So this is for all students. And what goes into that is on the teacher side, there's a whole bunch of different varieties of what we're talking about. And you can make it as simple or complex as you want as you transition through a better understanding of the teacher practices and your projects here.
Great. It speaks volumes to really knowing your students well, doesn't it? That kind of what are they ready for? What sort of skills do I need to build?
Yeah,
No
absolutely.
substitute for that. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the greatest things, just going back to that first example that we saw of Minecraft, the things that get students excited, for sure, they might be interested in the architecture of the houses or thinking critically about those houses. Those are the things that we as teachers are trying to really target in on and encourage that lively discussion. The thing that I guarantee is turning the heads in that is Minecraft. And when you can do what I kind of call academic jujitsu, it's using the trends and using the things that students are currently thinking about and doing at home in their free time and bringing that in and encouraging students to utilize those tools that they may see as just for leisure, and now they're thinking critically with those. It's just really an excellent thing to do, and it gets them motivated. And so coming over here, we're going to take a look at the transcript. The transcript is the journalism class that I have, and it's a weekly student news magazine that's run entirely by the students from start to finish. They pitch ideas, and in a week's time, they interview, they shoot their supporting footage, they edit it, and then they distribute it via social media and YouTube on Fridays. It looks at the impact of local, national, and international news, particularly through the lens of their student body. And as such, they receive feedback from both the student body and the faculty. It also gets them out in the community, engaged both locally and on a national level through the interviews and segments that they do.
Fantastic. As listeners are hearing about your classroom, they may think, wow, this guy, he's definitely a scout. He's he's far along with his PBL practices. But I wonder, for those who are just getting started, I'm guessing you didn't start with a full-blown weekly news magazine. Were there some baby steps that kind of led you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great thing to emphasize. Is what I would say is to start small. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, and you don't want to overwork yourself or exhaust yourself or your students. So the entire idea of this, of the journalism class, came from a project that was targeted in a unit in my videography class. And so that started with a multi-day assignment in which students were interviewing each other about issues that were going on in the school. For instance, food in the cafeteria, or the recycling program, or the new water fountains. So they started understanding the concepts and structures of what's going on through that unit, but it also allowed me to experiment with what would eventually become this really complex system. So always start small. That's an excellent point, Suzie. You've got to start small and think about what's going on, tweak it and amend it, and then build on what you started with.
I love that, and that chance for you as a teacher to continue your learning as well. That's so clear in all of this.
Yeah, and so just thinking about that first thing, the first essential piece of this is the design and planning of it. And again, back to what we were saying, start small. As you can see in the bottom here, what you want to do is focus on clear and concise roles. And actually, I get this from Suzie's book. It's fantastic. It's a Playhouse work team roles and responsibilities here. So sweep the playhouse floor, water the plants, report repairs, remind others about the rules. And so looking up top, you can see that what eventually we developed for our journalism program was roles and responsibilities that are really clear and concise. You want to really explain exactly what the students are responsible for, but not only what they're responsible for, when those deadlines are in a clear and concise manner, so you can see that weekly schedule, as well as allow them to explore different trainings and different ways of instruction for those exact things that they need to do. Because, for instance here, writing a monologue in scripts, it's easy to put that into a sentence, but how is that practically related to what they're doing, and how do they actually do all of that? So there's training videos. They're also they use each other as the veterans of the program to train as well. This can be time consuming, but you want to just start with kind of what the essentials of what you're starting with, and it's really important that you don't skip this step or jump into the project without fully thinking these pieces and components out. there's a lot of the great thing about project-based learning is that there's a lot of flexibility in what the students can do. But if the parameters are too wide in that, the students can either get confused, or the alignment of the standards or your academic goals can become muddied. So it is time consuming, but you want to start small, and these pieces can be reusable for other things that you're doing as well.
And Jeromie, as you're describing that, you talked about parameters. I think that challenges one of the myths about project-based learning, that is just kind of the Wild West. You can just invite students to do whatever they want. That's really not true. Project-based learning tends to be involved with meeting a particular challenge with some constraints in place. Those students that we saw, working on house designs for a client, they were having to work as a design team. In your classroom, students are having to work in the way that reporters do, in that role with those deadlines, with expectations for, getting feedback and revision. So I think it's great to remind teachers that there are constraints, there are parameters around a project, and that's just part of your instructional design. I think that's a really good message.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the students are appreciative of those parameters as well. I think that it's often it's misconstrued that you are losing the creativity if you have those parameters. And the students, you will see in the segments that are created, there's a specific structure that the students use, but they take wildly different visions and angles on how to get there with our broadcast.
Great.
So the second thing, and we discussed this earlier, was building the culture. I recently did an interview with two of the founders of the Transcript, and this is something that we constantly went back to. Building a culture is so important. It's not just the work that we're creating, it's the journey that we're taking together on how to get there. And through this, there's ups and downs, and as a teacher, you want to be observant of a couple things. First, of power dynamics, and those things are the kind of subtle or nuanced approaches that students are taking in their interpersonal relationships. And so if you see both, you will see in different groups, the power dynamics will have positive and negative aspects, and you want to both diffuse that tension through open communication, use those times where students are getting frustrated or a certain student is taking too much control of the group, and you want to use that as a teachable moment and see how you can change and change what's the course of that trajectory. You also want to foster morale through positive praise and acknowledgement. So on the right here, one of the things the students actually created was the Transcript Producer of the Week, and this is one of our producers, Kiara, receiving that, and you can see the smile on her face. It's so important that after the working hard throughout an entire project, that there's recognition of your accomplishments and that people are rewarded for their hard work and efforts.
That's beautiful. That her smile tells it all, and it also reveals to us that a reminder that culture is created by students as much as by the teacher. It's just really something that you do as a whole community. So really nice reminder there.
Yeah, for sure. And what we're going to look at in a second too is using students in different leadership positions to be aware and be cognizant of those things. It's not just they're in those power dynamics, but they also can be reflective in those positions as well. So to be able to reflect on that, internalize that, and think about different ways to promote each other and their peers. And so moving on to scaffolding of student learning, this has a similar tone to what you're trying to do in the planning phase, and what you want to do is clearly convey the avenues and stages of learning. So it's not just the roles and responsibilities that are going on, but you also want to think about the milestones of achievements as the project is progressing and what is ultimately the end product and end goal of their academic goals. You never want to assume that a student is at any level. There's a wide variety. The spectrum is really large on different abilities, and you want to be able to accommodate for all of those. And a great way of doing that is targeting your more experienced or students that may be may take quicker to certain things or be previously experienced in it, and use their strengths to help out other students and put those students in those leadership positions to help other students. Again, project-based learning is really student-centric, and so what you're trying to do is utilize all of your students to the best of their abilities in whichever abilities that may be.
In those moments when you have your more veteran students teaching others, that's a great reinforcement of what they know, and ongoing assessment. If you can teach something to someone else, you really own that material. So that's a great tip, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing is the psychology behind it too. Sometimes students are more, although we are teachers and we like to think that our word is bond, the students teaching other students, there's a certain psychological value to all of that unfolds, and there's a good receptiveness, and there's a different receptiveness. There's both good and bad of those situations, but there's a receptiveness to being taught by another student that is something worth looking at as well. And so, moving on to assessing student learning, this is very hard. Projects, especially ones that are longer in scope, can be really difficult to assess, and what I would really recommend is thinking about this, getting feedback from students as well. This is something that has been constantly evolving for the transcript, and the thing that the conclusion that we came to as a classroom is looking at a combination of traditional rubric, as you can see on the top, things like development of ideas and information, or quality composition, or grammar, sequencing, and that's combined with the deadlines that you can see at the bottom, stuff that is really kind of yes or no in a binary fashion. Were you able to accomplish all of your goals in the time allotted? You may have a great segment, but that segment may have been produced at 4 or 5 o'clock on Thursday when it's supposed to be done at 2 o'clock, and now the senior news editor is there until 8 o'clock. So by having a combination of these two, we found that it was one, respecting the work that the students were doing and reflective of the quality of what they were doing, while at the same time being accountable for being one piece of a larger puzzle that was going together. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, okay. And with that, in any scenario that you find yourself in, it's important to think about that communication and have consistency throughout for all students. And as we've seen through this, through the times that we're living in, you really need to have some flexibility and think about the best way to convey how well the student was doing, and what you need to, both the strengths of that and what you need to improve to progress that student on their path.
Sure. And as I'm looking at this and thinking about younger learners, the message I think for all of us is in your assessment plan, you're thinking about progress, productivity. Is work happening on time? As you mentioned, are students meeting those deadlines? But also quality. What's the quality of the learning experience? So you're needing to do both things, and you just make it developmentally appropriate in terms of the sorts of assessment tools you would use, with younger learners. But you're still paying attention to both things, formative as well as summative, kind of meeting your targets in terms of timelines as well as your targets for quality. So great reminders for all of us there.
Yeah, thanks. And so we could also look at engaging through coaching, and coaching versus teaching. And we often think of the teacher in the role of a traditional teacher, which fortunately has been changing to a kind of a progressive approach. But thinking about teaching as that coaching model, if you have a team and that team is out on the court or on the field, they are producing that game with you on the sidelines. And I think that that's an important thing to think about when you're working with project-based learning, is that you're still giving guidance and instruction, but the students are in charge of what's going on for that project. And that means, to a certain extent, relinquishing some power that you may have, or the general traditionary dynamics that you have. But that doesn't mean that necessarily a bad thing. And the thing that I would say and recommend here would be, and I got this from Suzie's book, excellent. Read the temperature of the room. We talked about reading those power dynamics through individual groups, but also just take a step back and look at how the entire room is feeling and what's going on. Sometimes there's going to be a really exciting buzz going on, and everybody's going to be kind of moving around and excited. Sometimes you get into a lull, and it's incumbent on you as the teacher to be reading that temperature and focusing the students, or thinking about ways in which you can work with them to foster that morale. Also, at the end, you want to be, and throughout the entire project, you want to be thinking about consistent and frequent feedback and be that conduit for critique. And what that means as well is thinking about just positive feedback models. For instance, with the transcript, on Fridays when the episode is released, we receive different feedback via email from students and faculty. And what I'll do is we'll take a second to read those and to pinpoint some of those things that we need to target for next week. But also, it's a good time to convey the importance of taking feedback seriously. And so, for instance, one of the things that happened this semester was we started receiving a freshman class's critiques, and the students at first were dismissing it because they were freshmen. And we had to have a conversation about not alienating 25% of your audience and taking what that feedback is and using that in a constructive manner. So you want to be that conduit for critique, but also let the students find those times where trial and error really does come into play, and they can learn from themselves or students. So students can also be coaches too, and that's the last thing that I'm going to present on this part. Is this really project-based learning really encourages students to take initiative and to think about those leadership positions and to be aware of not only themselves but their fellow peers in ways in which traditional ways may not target. And so use students as teachers and use students as coaches and use students to learn and grow together in ways that you can take a back seat. And by taking a back seat, it's not removing yourself from that situation, it's allowing students to grow and foster and thrive together.
Yeah, just wonderful advice.
Yeah, and so looking at how all this fits into remote learning. So we find ourselves in really crazy times in which we've really had to adapt fast to what's going on. And so a couple of tips through all of this are, first, leverage communication platforms. Figure out what you have at your disposal. Some schools use Google Suites. Some schools have a subscription to Schoology. Everybody has email. And so see not only what you can utilize, but how you can best utilize those communication platforms in a combination. So I will email students, but it's not the most timely way to get a hold of a student. So for the transcript, we have weekly production meetings, 2 to 3 production meetings via Zoom. Also, if I need to get them individually, I use the Remind app. And to access kind of instructional tutorials and things, I use Schoology as a platform. You can also support, so that's the support of the online resources, and have it somewhere where students can access those resources in the event that you're not around. And with that being said, you do want to set clear boundaries here. Moving to a virtual office doesn't mean that you're going to be available, and nor should it mean you're available 24/7. So set clear boundaries in both time and the appropriate dialogue and demeanor for what's going on. We're shifting into a time where students are invited virtually into your private space and you into theirs, and it's important to think about maintaining that level of professionalism and that level of appropriateness when thinking about those discussions that you're having. And finally, realize that it's more than work. And on the right, you can see that this was one of our transcript meetings, and we took a time out during the meeting for everybody to grab their dogs and their pets to show. And you can see that students were excited for that. And we live in a time where there's there's a lot more going on, and people's anxieties are heightened, and so having these kind of meaningful connections, regardless of, aside from the work, are really important as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's all about relationships, isn't it? And building that culture, whether you're in the same room or remotely. Fantastic.
And so, yeah, so thank you. If these are different ways that you can get a hold of us. I'm really happy to announce that we had our first remote produced transcript on Thursday that aired on Friday. And yeah, the students are doing wonderful, and they're still engaged. They're keeping engaged, and they're keeping their skills sharp. And yeah, definitely down. This is how you can get a hold of us, and definitely down to discuss more about different strategies for teachers and different approaches for students.
Great, Carolyn. I think it's back to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to both of you. Just as a reminder, we are recording this session, an enhanced session from what we ran last Thursday night, where we had some tech problems. And I, again, greatly appreciate Suzie and Jeromie and also Sue Klein coming back online and having this conversation. I think that, Jeromie, you ended on some wonderful suggestions for this world that we're in now. I never thought about the whole idea of, yes, we're on Zoom, everybody's on Zoom, and now everybody's looking around at the background of where you work and what's on the walls and who's walking behind you, etc. So it's very interesting. Okay, so I wanted to make note of something that's very important. In response to the virus and so many schools being closed, WGBH, in partnership with the Massachusetts Department of Ed and WGBY, New England Public Media, we've created a distance learning portal which is available for anyone. You don't have to be in Massachusetts, of course, at wgbh.org. And on this site, we've curated some of our award-winning resources that cross over disciplines for grades pre-K to 12. Everything is aligned to national and state standards. And we're covering commonly taught topics and subjects, and that's what guided our selection. But this is a site that is evolving, and we'll be refreshing it and taking in feedback and changing things up as we move along. The selections that we've made now have been based on ease of use in a variety of household settings to minimize the need for logging in, hands-on guidance, or group work. So we're really trying to make them appropriate for what's going on now. And then also to augment online learning, and in particular for students who have limited or no access, we're offering a daily block of programming, educational programming, on the World Channel in Massachusetts. So on the World Channel, and I know that many of you are Massachusetts educators, from 12 to 5, Monday through Friday, we are offering programming that is directly tied to educational standards, resources, etc. So you'll find NOVA programming, American Experience programs, etc., all geared towards grades 6 through 12. Younger children, we know, can continue to tune in to the public media stations during the day for the programming, educational programming that we always offer. And if you're outside Massachusetts, please just check with your local station to see if they too are offering special education programming on one of their channels. This is just a screenshot of the schedule for last Friday. We have started to run 15-minute webinars. We're starting this week to help you learn about PBS LearningMedia, which is the free digital learning library offering thousands of resources K-12 through across the grade bands of K-12. And so by virtue of registering for this webinar, you will get the registration links for these webinars. We have 4 of them that we're running the week of March 30th, and we'll also be running for the week of April 6th. And the week of April 6th will be grade specific. So you'll get more information from us through email. If you're a Massachusetts educator, we invite you also to check out the WGBY blog. WGBY, of course, is the public media station in Springfield, and Bess Capitanis, the education manager there, does a wonderful job of publishing announcements and resources, sometimes of specific interest to Massachusetts and sometimes of general interest. And you can find that at education.wgby.org. We're running lots of webinars, and the recordings to these are available on YouTube. And again, you'll get the links to those. But some recent ones were teaching about McCarthy and teaching about women in World War II, which we ran last week. Coming up is teaching using artifacts and primary sources in mid-April. All of our webinars feature teachers offering specific classroom suggestions. I wanted to just show you quickly, just to kind of whet your appetite about PBS LearningMedia. And again, we invite you to go to pbslearningmedia.org. You are welcome to browse the site without signing in, but we encourage you to sign in. It's free, of course, takes a few seconds. And that gives you full access to the content and the functionality of the site. By signing in, you'll be able to download and save resources to folders, etc. And we'll be covering a lot of that navigation and suggestions in the Jumpstart webinars that I just mentioned. So these are some collections of resources for the younger grades that you'll find on the site. A collection is a curated grouping of resources. So you go to one page and then you have many, many options of resources all organized around a topic or a program. And here are some examples for middle and high grades. And again, middle and high grades. A collection that I wanted to pay particular attention to is Bringing the Universe to America's Classrooms. This is a collection of Earth and Space science resources for K-12, and I want to emphasize K-12. The resources for the younger students are fabulous, as well as the older students. And we're covering topics such as weather and climate, waves, light, Earth systems, space. All of this project, which is a 5-year project, is in collaboration with NASA, and it's produced by WGBH, and all of the resources are on PBS LearningMedia. Coming this summer, there will be a broadcast on your local public television station, an American Experience program called The Vote, looking at the history of the suffragist movement. And there will be resources from The Vote on PBS LearningMedia. New content is coming to this site all of the time, and this will, The Vote is going to be broadcast in July, and we'll have resources up on the site about the same time. I wanted to call attention to interactive lessons and just give you a quick snapshot of what they are, because they're really appropriate for what we're going through now. Interactive lessons, a student can be one-to-one with their screen, working their way through a module that is based around learning standards and includes video and assessment. Everything is aligned to standards, of course. And we, through on PBS LearningMedia, there are interactive lessons for all grades and across the curriculum. This is an example of one. This was a lesson that is available in Spanish, published by WGBY in Springfield, again on PBS LearningMedia, about Latino culture. And here are some examples of other interactive lessons available. There are hundreds of them, so I just picked out a few to give you a sampling. Some of these are drawn from programs that you might see on public television, and then some are independent projects that WGBH has been funded to produce. The Power of Propaganda in World War II is a wonderful interactive lesson, part of a collection in collaboration with the International Museum of World War II. Teachers drive all of our work here at WGBH. Everything that we produce is really informed by teachers, and there are 2 current projects that we are looking for teachers for, and I wanted to mention them, and if you have an interest, ask you to contact me. One is we're developing a new podcast for 5th and 6th graders, most appropriate for ELA and social studies teachers, and we'd like to have teachers test this podcast out with their students. So if that's of interest to you, let me know. And then also we are always looking for ways to enhance the way we support EL students. And so a lot of our resources for social studies in high school, a lot of those resources are drawn from American experience. And we would like to learn more about what you need to use those resources and support your EL students. So both of these projects, we're looking for small groups of teachers to work with us. Stipends are offered, and again, let me know if you have an interest in learning more. The survey, we have a post-webinar survey that we'd like you to complete, please, and let us know what works and how we can do better. We know that project-based learning is a very popular topic. We would like to offer more on this topic, other webinars, and so in the survey I'm asking, one of the questions is related to what other topics related to PBL you'd be most interested in. At the end of taking the survey, you can download a certificate to acknowledge your participation, and the survey will close on April 8th. And finally, I'd like to thank again Sue Klein from the Harold Grinspoon Foundation for your collaboration and support, and to Jeromie Whalen from Northampton Schools, Suzie Boss from on the faculty of PBL Works, and a consultant and author, and Bess Capitanis, who is not with us on the recording, but Bess Capitanis, her contact information is there. She's in Western Mass at WGBY. For any questions or comments, you are welcome to email me, and I'll pass along your questions to the appropriate person. And I think that we are just about finished. So unless someone has final words, I think we will end this recording. And thank you again for participating and coming to this. Suzie, do you have any final words you wanted to mention?
No, just a thank you for putting this together, Carolyn, and to the teachers and other educators who may be listening. We wish you good luck with your PBL journeys, and reach out, let us know how it's going.
Great.
Yeah, I want to second that. Thank you so much, Carolyn, and I want to just, anybody that's watching, just thank you so much. We, as teachers, have been put into a predicament where we've had to kind of mobilize and revolutionize our practices virtually overnight, and to approach things with a positive attitude is just a wonderful, refreshing thing. And we're going to get through this, and thank everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the education department at WGBH, we are hearing daily from tens of, even hundreds of teachers, and we are just so impressed, not surprised, by how enthusiastic and willing to go the extra mile and be flexible educators are. So hats off to all of you, and good luck to all of us to stay safe and healthy, and thank you very much.